request Mr. Abhijit Das to please start the panel discussion.
Ladies and gentlemen, I'm very privileged to be here in midst of all of you, and I must thank Ms. Nayak, World Trade Center, Dev Jani and others for organizing this very, very important program on development-oriented global value chain integration. Global value chains is a topic which has attracted attention of industry certainly, of academicians, and more recently of policymakers as well. But the perspectives of each of these three separate set of actors has been rather different. And it's therefore important to get our fingers on precisely what aspects do these three different actors look at. So let me very briefly try to articulate my views on some aspects of global value chains. And I would also raise certain questions which thereafter the very distinguished panel comprising Mr. Gagan Sabharwal, who is the Senior Director Global Trade Development of NASSCOM, and Mr. T.S. Venkatram, Senior Director Supply Chain of Kellogg India, would address some of those questions. And of course, we've already heard Mr. Manoj Kothari share his views on a very successful model of supply chain, global supply chain. Essentially, all of you would be aware that the phenomenon of global supply chain really involves splitting the various activities which start from conception of a product to its design, to its manufacture, to after-sales service, and all activities related to the entire process. Now, earlier, most of these activities would be done at one geographical location, but over the past 15-20 years or maybe more, what really has happened is that the various activities involved have really been split and dispersed geographically. For example, if you look at typically, let us say, mobile phone, then the parts and components would be manufactured in different geographical locations. Typically, they'd be shipped to China, and there in China, at one particular location, they will be assembled together and then dispersed to be sold to the rest of the world. The interesting thing which happens in global value chains really is that there is a phenomenon called the smiley curve, and that is actually the heart of global value chain. What the smiley curve tells us is how are the gains distributed across the different actors in a global value chain. Typically, what happens is that the income which gets generated as part of the global value chain, the least income gets generated in the manufacturing segment. Whereas incomes which get generated through activities which precede the manufacturing segment, such as, let's say, product design, or activities which succeed the manufacturing segment, such as after-service sales or, let's say, transportation. These activities generate much larger incomes than manufacturing. What is the problem for developing countries from that? Very simple. Developing country firms, when they are integrated into global value chains, they are typically integrated at the manufacturing segment. And that's a segment which generates least income. The developed country firms are really at those ends of the value chain which generates larger incomes. You can well imagine that with production generally tending towards the format of global value chains, the asymmetry in income distribution between developed and developing countries is increasing. This is one concern for academicians. For the industry, the question is very simple, straightforward. I am the lead firm, I am the automobile manufacturer, I decide who does manufacturing, who does after sales service, who does the designing. I decide how will the income be distributed. I also benefit from protection through intellectual property rights. I, as the lead firm, really am the emperor of the world in my sector. How many lead firms are there from developing countries? Very, very few. So I was delighted to hear Mr. Kothari when he talked of his own experience. The challenge from the business perspective in the Indian context, the way I see it, are threefold. Number one, we need to develop Indian lead firms, which will not happen overnight, that will take decades, but in the meantime, is there an opportunity for our own small and medium enterprises to become cost competitive, be it in manufacturing, be it in other activities related to product design development, so that they become attractive partners for lead firms and SMEs can get integrated into such global value chains? And the third and very important part, and that's where Gagan will come in, is the fact that global value chains embody a lot of services inputs. And that's where a country like India has strengths. So what are the good ways of leveraging our strengths in services so that some of the Indian firms can get integrated in global value chains? So this is one set of questions for the industry. For the government, which is as usual the late entrant in this entire field, and perhaps rightly so, the question before the governments in developing countries are the following. Number one, does it make sense for the government to intervene at all? Can government policies help encourage firms to get linked into global value chains? If yes, what should be such policies? Let me give you a very simple example. The reason why China has succeeded in getting integrated in global value chains is sheer fact of scale of production. Is that the reality in India? What are the policy-induced constraints which prevent expansion of scales of production in India? Till we address that issue, imagining that Indian SMEs or Indian firms will get integrated into the manufacturing segment of global value chains and expand their operations might happen in a few pockets, but it certainly will not become a widespread phenomenon the way it's in China. So what does the government need to do about it? Certainly that's a question which I'm sure when the larger global economic summit takes place in February, that is one issue which will be deliberated upon. So essentially, let me close by posing a few questions. At a time when there is a huge churning going around in the manufacturing era segment, where a lot of automation is taking place, how should companies reinvent themselves to get better integrated into global value chains? Number one. Number two, in the light of automation, does it still make sense to talk about global value chains and employment generation? For a country like India or for a country like China, I mentioned that they are integrated through the manufacturing segment, which generates very low incomes, but it generates employment. So that is the attraction for them. But if global value chains tomorrow will require manufacturing by automation, then maybe the attraction for developing countries might get reduced for integration into global value chains. So what are the implications of automation? That's something which we need to think about. What can be policy responses for facilitating integration in global value chains? What do SMEs require to do to become attractive partners for the lead firms? From an academician's perspective, are there any downsides for firms which get integrated into global value chains? It might come as a big surprise for many of you, but yes, there is a growing stream of literature which says that integration in global value chains need not be the pot at the end of the rainbow. There could be adverse consequences as well. So the field is rich for sharing experiences, for a deeper understanding. And that's why I'm really delighted that World Trade Center and All India Association of Industries has decided to focus on this issue for their next Global Economic Summit. And this certainly is something in the nature of a curtain raiser. So I shall stop over here, and I would request Mr. Gagan Sabarwal, who is the Senior Director, Global Trade Development, NASSCOM, to share his views on global value chains from the services perspective, and also if he could address questions related to automation and how SMEs could position themselves better, and how the entire narrative on global value chains might need to get recast in light of increasing importance of services in global value chains as well as increasing incidence of automation. So Gagan, we'd like to hear from you.
And also must thank Abhijit for nominating me to be here. It's a real privilege to be here today. I think Abhijit articulated that he is, as always, has covered a variety of areas, and I think it's always enlightening to hear him on any given particular topic. And he covered this global value chain, which many of the people that we work on a daily basis in government don't understand. Very articulated. So, and he raised a lot of questions as well. So I'm not sure how I address all of those questions. But I will try and bring in some real life examples which we at NASSCOM are today working at, and try and sew that through in some of the questions that Abhijit posed for us as part of the panel today. But let me acknowledge that this global value change, I think it was Ms. Chaudhary who asked a very pertinent question, is this phenomena succeeding in India at all when we walked in? I think it's a very pertinent question, and my answer to that question would be that yes, it's happening in India in bits and pieces, but it's as always unplanned, happening rather than a planned strategy where India is chasing this particular goal. So you've seen many examples, whether you call it in the steel industry or where we export iron ore to China and they manufacture steel and they make more money, we make less money. Same is the case with textiles, story oriented from China and then to India, now to Bangladesh. Tomorrow, many people are saying Africa, Cambodia, Ethiopia, etc. So yes, India being the large country that we are, we need all sorts of jobs. We need low-end jobs, we need high-end jobs, we need highly paying jobs as well. But having said that, most of this job creation and investment in this global value chain happens in the manufacturing of the goods side. Not many people realize that in the services sector, India is playing a far more better role in getting integrated into this global value chain. And Indian IT industry is one prime example. Where we, today stand at about $150 billion worth of industry, providing employment to almost 15 million people, and which has a very huge, profound multiplier effect on the Indian economy, which is a separate story, not for today. So, in case of, IT, Abhijit articulated how a product cycle starts and to where it ends with customer support, after sales and whatnot. Many of these things are currently happening out of India by Indian IT. Many global firms choose to have their engineering and R&D centers based in India only because of one reason, not because of any cost, but because of the human assets which are available in India today. Companies such as Bosch, which is the leader in Europe, not just Europe but globally, they have 30,000 people here in India majority of doing R&D only. And what R&D do? They actually design car components for BMW. Not many people know that. So in India today, we are designing car components which are being used in products or services which are even not consumed in India. So that speaks volumes about the experience of companies, experience of the talent and the human assets which are available in India today. That's just one example. The whole engineering R&D vertical within the broader IT vertical today stands at about almost $18 billion, which is a huge amount for India. And this is only about R&D which global corporations are doing, whether it's Bosch, Siemens, IBM, Cisco, Samsung, LG, you name them, all of them are doing bulk of these this work from India. So that's just one example. The other example where we lost out was the low-end job creation, which Abhijit pointed out, which was the so-called call center business in India. It flourished 2 decades ago, and now, this business, even by Indian companies, is being outsourced or subcontracted to countries such as Philippines, where it makes far more competitive sense to do call center or voice-based kind of projects. So even by Indian companies, that business is being subcontracted because of the variety of issues involved in the service delivery of that function. So these are some examples where Indian IT is part of the global value chain, providing either after sales, cross sales, or providing R&D services. There was one case study in point which came about a month ago, where TCS entered into a deal with Volvo to help design their cars for the future and their IoT strategy. Now, since I bring the elephant in the room, how many of you have heard about IoT? Can you just raise your hands? Okay, so maybe half. Yeah, so this is the new wave of IT now. IoT, big data, artificial intelligence. These are the new buzzwords in IT and automation. You hear about them, read about them in the papers today. It will take me about a couple of minutes to explain you what to some of our colleagues present today who are not versed with the idea. Mind you, you all are using IoT in your daily life, but it's just that you are not acquainted with this terminology that we fancy ourselves with. So, when you use your mobile phones to switch on your ACs, you switch off your television and so on. These are very crude examples when hardware meets software. That's essentially, in a very crude sense, you can call that as IoT. So tomorrow, all these devices that you see in this room will get connected to internet in some form, and you can practically control lighting system, air conditioner system, what have you, locks on the doors, etc., all using your mobile phones or whatever computer that they're connected to. So this is a real life example of IoT, and this is now here and happening today in everybody's life today. So what's essentially happening is that the lines between hardware and the software are merging. Globally, I spent almost 1.5 months last year, in last 12 months in China, and same amount in Japan, because we at NASSCOM now realize that the next wave of growth of IT will come from IoT, analytics, artificial intelligence. The problem that we foresee for us or India is that India currently does not have a robust manufacturing ecosystem, which these countries do have. And if we want to develop or create solutions for the future and still be number one in IT 2 decades from now, we will have to marry our software with the hardware. And by the time Make in India succeeds and the manufacturing picks up and Foxcons of the world come and set up the factories over here, consumer will not stop. Consumer today is demanding solutions, rice cooker which is connected to your mobile phone, air conditioner which is connected to your mobile phone. How many of you would go ahead and buy a dumb smart TV or a dumb TV today? Everybody would buy a smart TV, or you would plug in a that add-on for few $1,000 to make a dumb TV as a smart TV. Nobody is using dumb products. Globally, trust me on this, I was in China 3 weeks ago, and we were pitching with the same theme, that how is it that India and China, India and Japan, India and Germany can co-develop and co-create for the global markets, leveraging our respective strengths in hardware and software. So there in this room, this was this lady. She was representing a $3 billion, which is not big by any standards in China. This was in remote area of Dalian, where she said, I represent a manufacturing firm, and today we are running scared. Why? Because we know that our business is now becoming a non-profitable business. Manufacturing itself is becoming a non-profitable business. With automation, Industry 4.0, God knows what will happen to manufacturing. And as it is, whatever that we create today in the market, somebody else comes up and says, okay, I'll give you 20% discount if you give me the quantity. So it's a never-ending, it's a foolish game that everybody understands that they're playing in the manufacturing. But they do understand, they said, we like your theme, that how do we co-create and in thereby create smart products. Today we are making dumb products. We want to make our products smarter. as soon as you add a software layer on your products, you make them smarter, and you can fetch any money that you want. The value lies in the software, not in the hardware. Let me give you a very clear example. Have you heard about Tesla? How many have you heard about Tesla, the electric car? Plenty of you. Now let me ask you a question. Do you recognize or do you consider Tesla as an automotive company or a software company? Tesla spends more than 60% of its amount on R&D and software and not procuring hardware. So even today, if you look at automotive companies globally, today if you go out and wanting to buy a car, you ask for features. I can see the car, all of them look like, they have 4 wheels and 4 doors and so on. But what are the features? Tell me about the features. And you're looking for a connected car. Similarly, you're looking for connected devices, connected homes, connected cities, smart cities, and so on. Today, the world is demanding smart products. So, essentially, the game changer lies in changing the narrative rather than playing in a red ocean strategy where everybody who is already part of the global value chain is bleeding and is uncertain about their own future because of a variety of things. And why should we promote ourselves to be part of the same red ocean strategy? Why should not we change our narrative and say, by partnering with India or by partnering with Indian SMEs, you create a smart products or smart solutions which help you fetch more business, which help you stay above the rest and compete in the global markets. So that's the theme that we at NASSCOM and I'm personally in charge of for the past 2 years. And we've identified China, Japan and Germany to be these key strategic markets where we want to invest for the growth of the industry for the future. Because the current model may die soon. It would happen in 2 years, it could happen in 10 years, but it's more or less certain that the current model, which has gotten about $250 billion, will not be a horse which can help us go another 150 in next 10 years. So we'll have to find different horses, and this we believe is the way to go. And this is what we're inculcating with our narrative, with experts like Abhijit and the policymakers that we work with on a daily basis in Delhi. So I'll stop over here and wait for my opportunity next time.
Thank you, Gagan. Thank you, Gagan. That was really useful in terms of reminding us of the very critical, important role which not only services but softwares would play in manufacturing, particularly from the perspective of global value chains and the role which India can have in that. I would now turn to Mr. T.S. Venkatram, Senior Director Supply Chain Kellogg India, which will bring us to the other perspective. A lead firm in global value chains, having a footprint in India, how can the Indian SMEs make themselves attractive to get linked to such a lead firm? So Mr. Venkatram, very interesting to hear from you now.
Thanks, thank you, Abhijit, and thanks, WTC and the Mayority. Thanks to everybody for having me here. So I'm not really an expert in the business, trade agreements and the facilitation, but what I want to talk about is that when a favorable policy or a trade agreement does kick in, how do we kind of exploit it from a business perspective? And that's something that I want to kind of talk a little bit about. So I come from Kellogg's. Kellogg's is a global food conglomerate, largely in breakfast, and we also play a snack space, healthy, nutritious, and convenient products. Yeah. So being in FMCG, you can't quite do without a marketing pitch. Yeah. So that's Kellogg's for you. So I think the biggest role that I think a large conglomerate can play is that because we are a globally connected company, I think there is an opportunity that exists to cross-source products. We can, there's no reason why a cornflakes made in some other country can't happen from India. And equally, how do we get, from an MSME perspective, how do we get our suppliers for raw material, packaging material, capital goods and services connected to the larger global world of Kellogg. And potentially once they become global, then we've seen this happen with my earlier organization, is then it's not just Kellogg that benefits, it potentially can impact a much larger base of companies as well. I think just want to start with a quick quiz to know, which is the most searched word on the internet. The Google search, most searched word. Let me tell you, it is not what you think it is. It is recipe. Yeah. So recipe was one of the most searched words on the internet. Yeah. It just tells you that food is a hugely evolving space. Yeah. When we think of startups, we think of a lot of technology, IT kind of startup companies, but one of the largest investment that's happening in startups is in the food space. Yeah. There are kitchens which are being created, there is fresh food delivery, there is calorie food delivery, there is nutrition at choice. So there is a huge stream of work that's happening in the food space, and I think as and being Kellogg, we kind of really track those trends and want to stay ahead and top of those trends. Yeah. And I think from a food processing sector, India has got huge potential. I mean, we one of the largest cereal growers in the world. We have a huge variety of pulses, fruits, and a lot of it that we can really play in, not just for India but also for the global market. I think Abhijit referred to the Smiley curve. Clearly, value is created from R&D to prototyping, and then when you manufacture to how you sell the product thereafter. Really, unless you're part of the whole value chain, you can't take the full value, the full benefit and contribution that can come to you as a country if you don't play the full value chain. And in the food processing sector, it's almost a given that you can play the full value chain because it would be economically viable for you to do it. Yeah, if you can have development close to the product, if you can have sourcing close to the product, it's almost a given that you can play the entire value chain. So it's automatically a very attractive space to be in. I just run my earlier company. Just an example is that we wanted to launch a product which was actually intended to be packaged Nimbu Pani. Yeah. So we all in summer would love a Nimbu Pani. But then if you can get it in a form that's absolutely, branded and trusted, then it just makes it easier. And when we were trying to develop the product, the biggest problem was, and I'm talking about 10 years ago, the biggest problem was to get the live pulp, which would meet our quality standards. And the surprising thing was we had to get pulp from Argentina in order to make Nimbu Pani for the Indian market. Yeah, because we just couldn't source the right quality of pulp in India. That things have changed from there. I think that was about 8-10 years ago. Today there is people in India, not at the right scale yet. We still have to go to countries like China and Thailand sometimes. But there are a few people who have invested in the entire value space. Ability to create the right cold chain, ability to create the right freeze drying capability, ability to store ingredients which are seasonal, what are the right prices, held over a few months to make it really viable for us to operate in. I think there are a lot of, just want to touch upon a few challenges that exist in the food space. I think the biggest challenge when we want to work in India is the infrastructure. I think that continues to be the largest challenge. I think the whole, and a lot of the infrastructure needs to be privately built, which make it very, very difficult and unviable. Yeah. There is fortunately a bit of a public partnership that's coming in through a few people who've invested hugely particularly in the areas of Gujarat, to kind of really create a huge value chain. The second is the agricultural commodity itself. I think a lot of times when we want to move products from India out into the global perspective, I think the battles that we fight are the quality perception. Yeah. So the beginning is that India would mean that there is a compromise on quality. Yeah. So I think there is some reality to it, and there is a huge amount of perception that we need to fight over. Yeah. I think a lot of the firms still need to believe in their mindset that they can deliver a globally competitive product. I think a lot of when we've started working with our own suppliers, I think there are a few people who kind of really bought into it, and there are a few people who still believe that they're comfortable operating with the current environment. Why do they want to kind of test cold waters ashore? Yeah. So I think that's the third opportunity. There is also a lot of issues, especially with and that's where I think policies, government needs to kick in with the whole Manoj referred to it about the whole payment status as well. I think the agricultural commodities per se mean that you're going to be subjected to commodity cycles, which could be different between India and the global play, and therefore how you're managing your cash flow, how are you getting yourself risk managed. There are some policies that need to come in today in India, like which does not allow you to hedge on commodities. I think some of those have to really kick in and get into part of your DNA if you want to make this happen. But the opportunities are immense, and I just want to touch on a couple of success stories. I think we work with a co-manufacturer somewhere in the north in Sonipat. It's just amazing how that person has evolved over the last 4 or 5 years. I mean, he just started thinking global. He was always in the food space in India. He's done, he has capabilities for freeze drying of fruits, vegetables. But he started thinking global, yeah, and he's put up a plant where he now supplies to a lot of countries abroad not of simple products, but super value added, yeah. So it's like he supplies a simple bar, yeah. We're all used to bars that we have, energy bars, yeah. But his bar goes at a price which is at a significant premium to bars that get sold otherwise, because he sells it to a certain type of consumers who are willing to pay for it. Yeah. So, for example, there's a club in UK called the Sins Club. Yeah. And the product so when you buy a product, the product is rated to be either a 1 sin, 2 sin, or a 3 sin, depending on the number of calories you have in the bar. Yeah. So a low calorie bar is a low sin bar, and so on. Yeah. And typically, when you want to supply to these people, you need to ensure that your calorie count is absolutely perfect. Yeah. So the sizing of the bar, the way he cuts the bar are all so perfect and so clear that the product is simple, but just by virtue of certain technologies put into it, he's able to charge a premium on it. Yeah. So I think there is a huge opportunity for us if we were to think, as Gagan said, technology, simple uses of technology to think out. Yeah. And other much smaller cases where we've got the closer home in Sangli in Maharashtra is our corn grid supplier. So, just given the fact that we came into India, we had to create our own supply chain on grids, on corn. Yeah. And so we bought a miller and for the first 10 or 15 years of our association, it was almost like Kellogg was practically running that mill. Yeah. Because we needed the corn more than he needed it. And pretty much we used to be there running that mill for him. And till at a point in time, we said, look, this can't go on forever. And I got a person, second player, to come in and invest in a corn grid capacity. Yeah. And that was a turning moment for this guy. He now realized, look, it's not going to work for me. And since then, he started giving us tremendous service. And not only that, he started thinking about investing in capacity and going out of India. Yeah. And the advantage that India has on agri products, one of the big advantages, right or wrong, is the fact that most of our products are not genetically modified. Yeah. So if we become a very, very easy sourcing ground for countries in anywhere that we can export into, and the fact that the guy made progressive improvements in quality. So we started him out with sourcing him into Thailand, into Korea, and the holy grail is that since last year he's been exporting into Japan. Yeah, and Japan is one of the most difficult countries to push agri products into if you've ever been in that. So I think it's possible. I think there have been success stories in it. So I think I just summarize saying that, look, I think as large conglomerates or any large players, I think we have the opportunity to play in the value chain. I think getting our suppliers, and it's not just CSR or any favor that we're doing. It just makes absolutely fantastic business sense. I think one of the things that most countries are doing is they are making procurement a regional or even a global organization. Yeah, and one of the reasons for doing that is that unless you do the global organization, the people don't think value chain globally. Yeah, so sometimes the Indian supplier is not very keen. An Indian procurement manager sitting in India is not very keen for a supplier to go abroad, saying that, oh, this guy become too big for his boots. Yeah, he almost wants him to feel very dependent on him, which I think is just the whole paradigm on the organization structure is changing to say we will go procurement global out. I think there's a huge opportunity for us to play in that space. I think the organizations need to start thinking the entire value chain, not just manufacturing. Yeah. So, thanks. I'll leave it there, Abhijit.
Thank you, Venkat. Very, very useful points. But what I really liked was when you said in between, and you ended with that as well, need to play the full range of activities in the value chain. And in the food processing sector or the agricultural product sector, this makes eminent sense given the fact that the employment multiplier of even domestic sales or even exports is so high that maybe that could be a good area for the government to look more closely at. Another very interesting point which you made was India's advantage in agri-global value chains, where you raised the aspect of there being no GMOs. Now there's yet another aspect which perhaps normally in the food processing industry we tend to lose sight of. Pick up any product, let's say coffee or let's say tea. The huge range of varieties which are available, it's mind-boggling. What happens currently now? All these different varieties are homogenized, mass-produced, and thereafter branding takes place. Now we are losing out something. If we were able to preserve the heterogeneous nature of our agricultural product, let's say the 10 different types of teas produced in the country, and thereafter branded separately, I think the value which we can realize is immense. Well, as I mentioned, global value chains is really a big ocean. Pick up any area, you can go into tremendous depth and come out with lots of different implications. At this juncture, I'm sure in the audience there would be many questions in your minds. So I would request those of you who want to raise any questions to identify the speaker, identify the panelist, briefly introduce yourself as well, and then raise your question.
I'm Siddharth Rajgopal. I represent the textile sector. So, of course, I have experience on my sector, which, of course, as you might well know, is labor intensive. So, very interesting point that you made, that manufacturing doesn't really pay as much as the other value add. So, it always raises a question that countries like India or South Asian countries do have an advantage, I think, in terms of the labor cost, as we say, labor arbitrage, as we put it, availability of the factor costs which go into manufacturing. So in our own industry, we have seen the shift that has taken place. You see the garment industry right from Europe through Southeast Asia into South Asia and maybe beyond Africa. So, well, I do appreciate the fact that manufacturing may be low end, but still, considering the per capita income differences, considering the labor advantages, considering the costs involved in manufacturing, manufacturing is here to stay. And the greater component which is now coming is the servitization of manufacturing, where the services component, which is obviously a large part of the GDP in most of the countries, gets integrated into manufacturing. So when you see the services component there, of course the money lies. But the question that comes up before me is that while we are concerned about global value chain and the globe being at next door, regional integration, as we have been talking about. So while I could move to the globe, but what about the region? ASEAN is a classic example of an integrated region which moves together. And simultaneously, South Asian region where we sit, it perhaps has its own limit of goods and even services. So I think what I'm perhaps trying to say is that some energy needs to be put in and looking at, because we have also done some studies, and on the textile we found that while ASEAN gets a lot of space in the media, South Asia is equally doing well, if not better than ASEAN in certain elements of manufacturing. So I think while global value chain integration remains an important goal, because the markets are overseas on the retail side, where we represent perhaps, but with the retail format being developed and the per capita income going up, I'm sure today, for instance, if you see China, which was the workshop of the world, is today also a great consumer, and there's a shift in the way the Chinese are looking at shifting away from manufacturing and coming into consumption. So I think while the point that I'm making is all is not lost when it comes to manufacturing. I think may not be much money in it, but I suppose it is here to stay, and the labor arbitrage is not going away too soon. Even IT friends must remember that the way they started IT in this country was essentially the labor arbitrage, and as technology moves, as various innovations come in, artificial intelligence, robots, and labor getting replaced by technology at various ends, which is in the scheme of things, I think, because when we started the Industrial Revolution, when the spinning, the weaving unit was invented, it almost created havoc through the centuries. So I think that main point, that is perhaps equal attention needs to be given to the regional value chain, which I think then gets integrated and has its own bargaining powers with the global value chain. Thank you.
Very, very, very useful point raised by Mr. Siddharth Rajgopal. Actually, since we go back almost 2 decades, I just wanted to raise one question to you, Siddharth. We have seen recently in United States bit of a revival of manufacturing in the textile sector. Of course, it's not very widespread, it's just in a couple of pockets. So people are now speculating reshoring back of textile manufacturing in the United States. If that were to happen on a larger scale, would that pose a threat to manufacturing and trade through global value chains in Southeast Asia and China and South Asia? Is there any perception or any assessment of that, or is it too premature to talk about it at this juncture?
I think one of the points, one or two people went from India into the United States and trying to invest, let's say in ring spinning. Well, for various factor costs being low and manufacturing very good, you have access into the other markets, there were duty-free access, tariff preferences, and the works. But unfortunately, they folded up. So the story didn't go beyond some headlines that came in. Because be that as it may, the fact remains that the cost of manufacturing has remained high, and the wage cost is unable to sort of offset the lower cost you may have of power, of capital, of access. It's not able to do that. So some of the gentlemen who went for spinning, for instance, if I were to take an example, the costs remained high. So I think now what I would say is that kind of an arrangement is there in pockets, niche product lines, not mass product lines. So I think we still have a chance in South and Southeast Asia.
I just wanted to say that I completely agree with you on the fact that manufacturing is absolutely critical. I mean, I think the intent will, of course, be to try and expand beyond manufacturing, but given where our country is, the fact that we need to create jobs, and which is why a sector like FMCG is a little more attractive than chemicals, because lower investment generate greater jobs in FMCG or textiles for that matter. So I think we do need to play that space, but I think the labor arbitrage is a little overdone. I mean, while there is arbitrage in cost, availability of skilled labor is still a huge challenge in India. I mean, any of us who've tried to find a good driver or a cook will know that it's not easy to come by. 1.2 billion people, but you can't find the right guy, and that happens to us when we recruit for our operations in India as well. So I think we will have to continue to play manufacturing. I think getting into the value chain is important. If it means with manufacturing, we get in there. But the intent should be to try and see how we can move to the play the overall space as well. I think that should be the intent here.
And speaking on that theme of playing on the overall space, you mentioned Gagan, you mentioned about Indian professionals designing car components. Now, I have always wondered, why can't we have 3 big design hubs in India? One for textile and leather design, second for jewelry design, and second for automobile design. We should think in terms of creating these 3 big hubs, which would do designs for multinational firms across labels, and they need not be focused to a particular label. What needs to be done by the government, by the private players to generate such type of design hub in the country? I'm sure that's something which might be worth reflecting at some other point in time. More questions from the audience. I saw. Please go ahead.
Yeah, on design front, I can say that JCPL is probably only Indian company which is a chief design officer, and that sits in management committee. And we were, I think, 3 to 4 years continuously in Forbes Asia top 25 design companies. So design is the way to go. I agree on the same.
True, and that is one area where our infrastructure constraints, shortcomings will not really prove to be that big a barrier. So certainly design can be one area. China has taken it up in a very, very big way and in a very compressed time frame. I don't see why we can't replicate it over here. Sir, you had a question. Yes, please.
Electronics Component Circuit Board Manufacturing Association. My global travel has enlightened me about where we are right now and what is the need of the hour. Especially, from NASCOM, you would agree a few points that I want to bring it is. When you talk about bringing out a smart product, yes, we have the software advantage, or we do have the training force. But what about the hardware, where we are still at a very nascent stage? Neither the scale nor the modern way of manufacturing we are. Nor I foresee in next a year or two we are seeing any major business houses investing into the electronics manufacturing field, except the Videocon or Onida, which their state of affairs is known to most of us. So you need to do the backward calculation and integration, how to achieve where the others are able to do it. In particular, China as well as I saw that in next 5 years, the major investments from Japan, Korea, Taiwan is going to China. Their market share in circuit board, which is basic fabric of any electronic system, is 40% today. From 8% to 40%, they achieved it in almost 5-7 years. And now, these 3 countries, which are the electronic giants, are investing so that the China's circuit board manufacturing will go to 60%, from 40 to 60%. Just think of it, how they will dominate the whole world. And this is dangerous. When we are talking about what we have on the other side, what we earn in software, we almost spend more than in the hardware. Our electronics consumption today, our imports, has almost exceeding our oil bill, which is, another alarming. So here, when I came to this global value chain integration, and where we really need is, we have to focus ourselves right now. The other sectors, I think we are not as much lagging as in electronics, and which is now the necessity of our life. When we wake up in the morning, probably we touch the electronics first, then our spouse. So, this is where we need to work really strongly. Yes, they have worked out the margins so thin, but the volumes are huge. We are not producing a single mobile phone today in our country. It's all assembled here. These are shocking news. We are almost at par with what we are consuming with China. In some segment we are smaller, in some segments we are in mobile consumption. So these are the things that I do participate in the other forums, but since you have come over here, and this is where we need to work backward to see that how we can achieve it. I just collected information that 18% subsidies are given to some of the computer manufacturers in China. How can you beat that? On top of that, our interest rates and various other factors. Yes, our labor is definitely far more competitive, and we can achieve that. But the other factors, outweighs us. And that's where we have to really think in a systematic manner. We are intelligent enough to work it out, if we want to work it out. So this is where, all of you, those where you are influencing, especially in an electronic sector, this is where I feel that we need to do a real work, and then we can be the next exporters for the electronics. Because in certain sectors we are competitive, where it is a very low-end products. We are not in the other ones, or there is no incentive enough, or there is, scare, people are scared to invest. Okay, thank you very much.
Gagan, would you like to respond to this very delicate question?
Well, I dare not. I will only try and walk myself out of this maze. All your questions, all your observations are very valid. And trust me on this. I've been part of many government meetings, even though electronics is something not part of scope of NASCO. But overall scope of it does fall in the overall scope. For the obvious reasons that you mentioned, that the ICT bill or the ICT equipment import bill will actually grow fourfold by some standards in next 5 years or so from our oil bill and so on. So yes, these are very troublesome signs. Today we are importing almost $7 billion worth of dual SIM phone from China alone each year. That's another anecdotal evidence. And why is it that we have the market, we have the propensity to pay, we have the consumers? Why is it that we need to still import? And that's the pertinent question that government of India is even today trying to solve that. And they're trying to do it with whatever that they can at the moment. See, the ecosystem will not come up overnight. Let's be very candid about it. The kind of sensors and the kind of semiconductors that go into making a smartphone is impossible to make even today in China. Forget any other country. I know I'm working with Murata, which is a tech leader in Japan, and they manufacture 70% of the components that go into making a smartphone. And some of their sensors are as small as rice grain, one rice grain. And the quality that this sector demands is just almost at 8 sigma, forget 6 sigma. And yes, China and Taiwan, they do their bit and assemble all of these phones, but Murata is not doing manufacturing in China also. They do manufacturing only, this is a very high-end manufacturing, it happens only in Japan. So, we've been trying to persuade Murata to come to India and start the manufacturing, so that it starts the ecosystem and so on and so forth. We try to work things out with them, even though this is out of our scope. But as I said earlier, because our objective is how is that we marry our software with the hardware. That's why we go into China. Now, coming back to Abhijit's question on what India needs to do, I think China is different. You can't compare India with China. Tomorrow, if they want to do an policy change for electric vehicles, they can easily announce this road from Guangzhou to Shenzhen is now autonomous vehicle only. So they could do it overnight. It doesn't take them much. Over here in our democracy or in US, it will take ages to get this thing through. So they can work on a speed of lightning as they wish, and that's the power of the system. that has got them to where they are today. With respect to the point that you raised, I think I was part of the meeting a month ago with Japan working group, where the Japanese were raising this point that India is now towing the line that this mobile phone business is not part of ITA 1 and so on and so forth, and they're trying to put in more duty. So government is trying to pursue all the options that it has on the table available with it to get somehow companies to either coerce by hook or by crook, or incentivize them to start operating and manufacturing out of India. Having said that, some of the large enterprises should have taken lead. Sharp was for sale, for instance. We persuaded a lot of big business houses to purchase Sharp, which in my book was a phenomenal technology going at dirt cheap price. And as the luck would have it, Foxconn got it. Even today, Sharp has 8K television ready for the commoditization, which nobody else on this planet Earth has. So they have the technology. We lost the opportunity over there again. So yes, we do our bit. Some of these things are a little out of scope for us as well. But we do make those pleas with the business houses as well as with the governments to see if some of these things could fall into place. Because these are bigger Lego blocks. They have to fall into place for the ecosystem to start catering to MSME sector.
Thank you, Gagan. Mr. Manoj Kothari has to leave, so ladies and gentlemen, let's just applaud his participation. I'm actually very happy that this question on electronic sector has been raised, because in my perspective, what we have seen in the electronic sector over the past decade and a half is the result of absolutely wrong policy choice made by the Department of Commerce. Sometime in 97-98, the government, for whatever reasons I am unable to fathom, decided to become part of what is called the Information Technology Agreement, whereby we bound our hands and gave a commitment at the WTO that on 200 odd products in the electronic sector, we would not impose any customs duty. No doubt our hardware sector was struggling even prior to 1997. But what India's membership to the Information Technology Agreement did was to hasten the demise of the hardware sector. And the results are now in front of us, when we do foresee that the deficit on account of trade of electronic hardware will far exceed the oil bill. So the short point over here is that the choices which the government makes, at that point in time it appeared a bit rational, but a decade and a half down the line, we are seeing what a disastrous decision that was. And how disastrous that decision is, let me recount. I'm certainly not revealing any state secrets over here. Sometime around 2007-2008, the Planning Commission formally asked Commerce Ministry that is there any way by which we can acquire the right to impose customs duty on electronic products? Can we walk away from this Information Technology Agreement? Answer was sorry. There's absolutely no way by which we can walk away from our obligations under the Information Technology Agreement. Yes, there is a possibility of renegotiating what we have lost out. We can acquire the right to impose customs duty on some of the electronic products, but we will have to pay a huge compensation in terms of lowering tariffs on a very broad range of products. So overall, in the balance, it was decided that it's absolutely not feasible to renegotiate our tariffs on the electronic products. Now, this should be a very important reminder to all of us, be it business, be it government, be it the research community, that when the government is at the verge of taking such very important decisions, we have to raise our voice. When the government took this decision on Information Technology Agreement, there was absolutely no research input which went into the government. that's my speculation, the only reason why the government signed this agreement at that point in time was that if we don't sign it, then we will be going against the market sentiments. That might have been true, but in the long run, we've ended devastating our hardware industry. So despite whatever optimism might remain with Gagan and with you, sir, I'm not very optimistic that in the foreseeable few years at least, we will be able to get back on our feet in the hardware sector. We will have to pay the price for our wrong policy choices in this area.
Can we not get into the, tactical subsidies, which is what the other countries are also, doing it smartly. I was I've just returned very recently, and I had no interaction. This is my first meeting that I'm just interacting with you.
Certainly, subsidies is an option, but is that a sustainable option? Number one. And given the fact that if China is providing 18% subsidy on parts and components, we will have to more than match that to take care of the other deficiencies within the country. So, does the government have deep pockets for it? I'm not sure, number one. But number two, given the fact that the trade deficit on this particular sector will be so huge, I think there's a case for articulating or lobbying with the government to give a more favorable look towards giving some incentives to the sector. Otherwise, we are going to be in real deep trouble.
We need to focus. We have to recalculate the whole thing. It is possible. I mean, this is not the forum where we can, but it is possible.
It will be very useful to continue that dialogue with you, sir, separately. I'll be very happy to engage with you on that.
Yeah.
More questions from the audience? I'm seeing a hand behind. Yes, sir, please. And Devjani also had a question in between, so I'll come back to Devjani. Yes.
My name is Aniruddha Pradhan, and I'm basically into my startup makes UAVs and is into artificial intelligence. Now, coming to the subject of hardware and components, I think we should start at the beginning. If you go to the startups, there is technology available to make silicon wafers. We have abundant supplies of silica sand available, but as a country we use the silica sand to supply to our glass industry. Whereas it would be much more of value provided if the silica sand were to be used for making silicon wafers, which can be used not only for electronic components and as well as for your solar cells. So it's a huge possibility which needs to be looked at. Our priorities have to be looked at. Thank you.
Sorry, sir, I'm not going to let you go with that statement. What may be useful is what are the practical steps on that? Are there any specific policy interventions which you would like to suggest? I think that would make it more practical, more relevant, and there's something which World Trade Center can thereafter pursue with the government. So if you are able to give some suggestions now or even later, that would be most kind of you.
I can give some suggestions, and first of all, I would like to say that this technology is with the academic institutions right now. I have the details I can provide it, and the real need is to take it from the academic institutions to the industry.
Okay, that would be very useful. I'm sure WTC has taken note of Mr. Pradhan's suggestion, and maybe that could be a very fertile area for some further work, and that can be of tremendous use for policy making input. Devjani, you had a question.
It's a kind of a suggestion. First of all, I want to make a point. You mentioned about three hubs: the auto, jewelry, and the IT, automobiles, IT, and jewelry, right? No, sorry, design hub.
Design hub.
So that's where I want to inform that now the government under the Department of Industry and Industrial Policy and Promotion has set up a National Design Council. So it's a new council, so I'm sure they will perhaps take it up. The other point I want to make is that, the world over we see that the services sector is growing at a much faster pace than the manufacturing sector. While we don't want to overlook the importance of the manufacturing sector, even in India, the services sector is growing at a much faster rate, and its contribution to the GDP is much higher than what the manufacturing sector contributes to the overall GDP. Now here, this is very pertinent because even Dr. Abhijit Das said about the smiley curve, and where we see that you mentioned that in the manufacturing sector, the revenues are shrinking, and whereas in the services sector, it is much more, pertinent. And also there is, right from R&D to logistics to infrastructure, there is a wide segment where we can think of tremendous global value chain integration. So if we look at that, what we need to really look at is seriously is a services sector in our country. We have the national manufacturing policy. I think we need a national services policy in our country today, because both manufacturing and services are integrated even in the value chain linkage. So while we talk about the national manufacturing policy, I feel that as services policy, an integrated services policy, we have the IT policy, of course, which is one segment of the services sector. But if you take the services sector in totality, good national services policy would help. Thank you.
Excellent suggestion, Devyani. There is just one problem in it. Manufacturing has formal ownership in the government in the form of DIPP. Services, there is unfortunately no department which has an overarching, all-spanning control over the services. Commerce Ministry is trying to arrogate this responsibility to itself, but there are problems. So till this very fundamental issue is resolved, or the government decides to create a nodal ministry for services, which might be a useful idea, there would be real operational problems in coming up with a national services policy. But that's something which is highly desirable, no doubt.
And I just want to add that my colleague here also shared the data with me that 34% of our total FDI goes into the telecom and IT sector. So, considering all this, I think national services policy.
Absolutely, it's highly desirable, no doubt about that. More questions? Yes, sir, please.
Sir, my name is Vimal Kothari. I am associated with a few NGOs. We are running schools in rural area, which amounts to nearly 60,000 schools with total student population of 30 lakhs. And we have also commissioned nearly 50 computer training vans, which goes into villages on different days, on different timings, and give training to local people, right from primary school students to elder persons, in English as well as local languages. Can you suggest, sir, what particular training should be given to our students who are primary level students, which can give them remuneration, because ultimately they are rural people, and you know very well what are the conditions in rural area. In spite of Manrega, where the government is spending crores of rupees, there is vast poverty and unemployment. So whether NASCAM can suggest any area like mobile manufacturing or handicraft or some cottage industries, funding is no problem for us. We are run private donations.
So we at NASCOM are already working in the same space. I guess we are the only association in the world that has its own foundation as well, which is called as NASCOM Foundation, and which works in this precisely the same space as you are, where we also work as an aggregator of sorts. As you know, most of our member companies have huge employment across India with our offices. All of these run on computers, desktop, laptops. All of these machines are made redundant right after 3 years. So we collect all of these machines, which are not given, which normally would fetch a company about 5,000 rupees, per laptop. But they donate all of these machines to NASCOM Foundation, which in turn distributes all of these machines to the rural BPO cause that we have devised. So we have a rural BPO scheme. I'd be happy to connect you with my colleagues in the NASCOM Foundation, with whom you can take this conversation forward. We can do that offline, so I don't need to waste time of everyone. There are plenty of schemes, and I think they would be the right team for you to initiate this discussion. They could share more about the program that we are currently running and the program that may be part of your wish list where we can participate. Thank you.
Thank you. One or two more questions? Yes, Dr. Nanda, and then Raja. And those would be the last two questions.
My question is, perfect point that ecosystem has to be created, which will be developed only over time. How do you see our budgetary policies, foreign trade policy, and our FTA stance, whether that is in sync with development of global value chain integration of Indian commodities or not? And that test should be applied, because those will be specific policies. They are very essential. Then only a proper ecosystem can be developed.
Right. Gagan, would you like to respond? Of course, I will respond. Or Venkat, would you like to say, since you mentioned the point initially that need to leverage trade agreements, at some point you said that. So, would you like to respond? Of course, I will give you my final response on that, but this would hear others' views as well.
I think I'll leave it to Abhijit. But all I want to say is that from a perspective of agriculture, I do see that it's very clear that there are huge lobbies and tariff barriers that continue to exist. Yeah, I mean it's as much as over a period of time they are getting a bit broken, but basic agricultural commodities are hugely and it's natural that every country wants to protect a large portion of the lobbies are strong even in countries which are developed markets. And I think that's the opportunity that we have, is to therefore play in a slightly more value-added space. Yeah, I think the dynamics immediately change once you move into the value-added space. But otherwise, I think I'll leave it.
Gagan, would you like to?
Sure. I know it's his daily work that you asked this question, but I'll share my own perspective on the topic. I think the foreign trade policy is announced by our Commerce Minister. I'm not a very big fan of foreign trade policy. I think even if you don't announce one next year, it won't have any difference on anybody's life. You're just tinkering, some of the interest rates from 4% to 3.9% or 3.7%. It's a foolish game in my book. It doesn't moves the needle by much. We need a complete revamp of foreign trade policy. Foreign trade policy is how you push your exports, not articulate how you subsidize your domestic production. So that needs to be revamped. I mean, I'm not a big fan of foreign trade policy in no uncertain terms. The other part of the FTA, I must add that we go representing our own sector when the government calls for the consultation. And I must add that most of my colleagues who come from different other verticals, whether it's goods, manufacturing, chemicals, etc., most of them come with a defensive mindset. बंद कर दीजिए, किसी को अंदर मत आने दीजिए, is their mindset. Nobody comes back and says, open this sector up and it will open competition, it will add to our quality, more technology will come in. No, their only response is, don't allow foreign players to come in. Or they don't say anything. Honestly, I'm telling you, in the government consultation, either they don't show up. If they show up, either they come with a defensive mindset or they have nothing to share whatsoever. The quality of feedback that filters into the government system is so poor. Sometimes, government policies are made, just because of the lack of information on government files. So, some of these sectors have to push their associations more. that they come informed, they come with a long-term vision, with a short-term vision. That okay, give us 10 years, and within 10 years we'll be competitive, but till 10 years keep the borders closed, but after 10 years open up the borders so that technology can come. I mean, there should be some constructive dialogue with the government. You can't say that shut the gates for the foreign players forever. That's not the way to do business. Economically, if you look at it, competition, but when you do deal with the competition, only then you grow yourself, in quality, quantity, maturity, technology, practical, etc., etc. Any sector. But if you keep your doors shut, you will never grow as an economy. Those are few observations.
Oh, excellent. I would agree with most of what you have said, but with one minor fine-tuning. You're very right that the foreign trade policy is really a document about changing some incentive structure here or there. But what got lost when the 2014 or 2015, when the foreign trade policy was announced, was that there was a supplementary document that was called the Foreign Trade Policy Statement that precisely contains what you have in your mind. How to boost exports, what products should we look at, what market should we look at, should it be through the FTA route, what are the constraints. Unfortunately, that document just did not receive the attention which it deserved. That really was the true foreign trade policy, which didn't talk about incentives, which really had a medium and a long-term view of how to boost India's exports. Coming back to the question which Dr. Nanda raised, integration in global value chains, there are many different push factors for it. There are some factors which are related to trade policy, for example, tariffs or how open is the country to investment. But at the same time, there are also other factors that are related to infrastructure. Even if I make duties zero, if I do not have a good infrastructure, if I do not have good port facilities, if I do not have good logistics, absolutely no way by which I can get integrated into global value chains. So to that extent, whatever we may have done through FTAs, I think is one part of the story. As long as we do not address the other side, which is our infrastructural deficiencies, any tinkering in the trade policy or investment policy will perhaps not be adequate. Right. A last question, please.
Good evening, distinguished panelists. I represent World Trade Center, Mumbai. I have one clarificatory question to Mr. Sabharwal. During your speech, you mentioned about NASSCOM identifying 3 countries: China, Germany, and Japan. You are considering these countries as strategic market for India. So could you please elaborate on that? How India can integrate into the GVCs with these countries?
I must say that it's not with the perspective of GVC. It's about more, as I said, the theme that we've identified is that we would want to promote the idea of co-development and co-creation for the global markets, leveraging our respective strengths. So, if a company is manufacturing a rice cooker, for instance, in China, or a bicycle. Let me give you an example of bicycle. I don't know how many of you have been to China recently in the last 1 or 2 years, but this whole cycle sharing platform that China has evolved is a classic example of IoT and analytics working at its best. Also of hardware and software. Nobody talks about cycle these days, but it's the cycle sharing platform which has got China back on the cycles today. So you go to China, it's a wonderful model of Mumbai started it. Now you have OFO. There are 53 cycle sharing platforms. You pick up any cycle on the road, you leave it anywhere. You open it from your phone. You just pay 10 rupees in literal terms, 10 rupees per hour. So, and these cycles are flooding the streets of China. You can pick anyone out there and leave it anywhere that you go to. There are no cycle stands, unlike Europe, where you have to pick from the stand and wait for the stand to get empty and so that you can park yours. You just leave it anywhere in your basement, parking or anywhere. Now, this is what we say is the power of IT. This company has turned unicorn in less than 9 months when they came online 1.5 years ago. within 1.5 years today, this company alone is manufacturing 10 million cycles. They have 10 million cycles on the roads of China, all made, and the locks made by Foxconn themselves. They are now being asked by Singapore to open their branch over there. They have plans to launch in India as well, and they are now going to US and America. So 53 cycle sharing platform companies came online in past 1.5 years. 4 of them have shut shop because there's too much of cycles on the road and too much of competition as well. Now they are working out a formula where you have a car sharing platform. The idea remains the same. You pick up a car and you park it somewhere. You board a metro or whatever. So obviously you can't leave the car in the middle of the street, but they don't intend to have any designated parking slots, or they will have different parking slots. So they're coming up with this model now. If I, as a consumer, I'm part of the mobile platform, I pick up a bike, I'm going from my metro station to my home. This platform will pop up a message on my mobile screen saying this mall that you're crossing right now is offering this discount or 1+1 or whatever, So this is the part of data analytics and IoT at its best. Now, you might be wondering, why I'm talking about this model over here is precisely the same point. Could you have developed that kind of platform over here? Answer is no. Why? Because you could have developed software, analytics, that's easy. But can you change the cycle design radically to make sure that it operates from a phone? And the cycle is made in such a fashion that it doesn't have any tires with the tubes, so you can't deflate one. It doesn't have any chains. It doesn't have any spokes in it. So, if you have to do something with it, you'll have to throw it on the tracks, on the railway tracks. Some people tried that as well. Some people in China took up the bicycles and threw them in the rivers. But these cycles are marked with their GPS, instrument. So these are the new revolutionary ideas which are powering or jumping on this bandwagon. Why we chose China, Japan and Germany precisely is because we want to partner with the hardware manufacturers over there and together build products for the global markets. One case study that has now emanated in last 1 year with our effort is a Japanese railway signaling manufacturing company partnered with an Indian analytics firm, and together they sold their solution to Indian railways. It could have been Japan railways, it could be whatever, what have you. But the point is, can we combine our core strengths and then be able to create a new market or a new customer? So that's our theme. So Germany for Industry 4.0, China and Japan on IoT and analytics is our theme. Singapore is not that big, but Singapore is with more the theme of the fintech because they want to be the financial technology hub. So these are the themes on which we are partnering with these ecosystems.
Very, very useful discussion. Could I go in the reverse order and request both Venkat and Gagan to give very brief closing remarks from their side?
I think it's been a wonderful occasion for me to participate in. I think I've probably taken out more than I've put into it, but I think fundamentally, I think just creating efficiency in value chain. I think India is a huge market to play with to begin with, and for companies like us, creating efficient value chains that serve the Indian market in itself is a great opportunity to go global. Yeah, I think as we start looking at just the efficiency in Indian value chains, I think a lot of it goes global, and that going global is then a lot of aid that kicks in with the policies and the free trade agreements and so on and so forth. But basically, it's all about creating efficiencies and productivity and playing the value chain in its totality.
I'll just say this, that since I shared what we're doing with some of the foreign economies, if there are stakeholders or companies over here in this room today who would want to use the same theme and build with Indian tech startups or tech ecosystem, then do contact us. It's not just the foreign ecosystem. If you have good products, good solutions which can be improved upon and then taken to global markets, then do let us know, do share with us. Even if you're a small company, that doesn't matter. That doesn't really matter. We are more than happy to get you married with a right partner in your space, addressing those particular areas from the technology side, so that you could combine your strengths and So this is not just the offer for China or Japan only. This is an offer for our Indian colleagues and Indian counterparts as well. So do spread this word across. If you feel that there could be some others who could benefit from this scheme, we would enable this from our side. And I must thank both Abhijit today for nominating as well as moderating this wonderful session, and Ms. Nayak and all of your colleagues. Was a very wonderful discussion today. An evening well spent. Thank you.
From my perspective, 3 or 4 key messages do emerge. Global value chains are here to stay for at least a few more years, despite automation or despite some reverse trend in backshoring. Second is we need to try to play all segments of the global value chain. And when I talk of global value chain, it's important to remind ourselves what Mr. Siddharth Rajgopal said, that we should not ignore regional value chains as well. Another important message which emerged was manufacturing certainly will remain the key. But we need to recognize that there's a growing servicification of manufacturing. So how services dovetails with manufacturing, particularly from the perspective of making smart devices, will in a way not only pose a challenge, that will provide opportunity, and that is the area for future growth of Indian manufacturing as well as the Indian IT sector. So we need to remain cognizant of all the opportunities as well as the challenges. So before I close, let me thank my fellow panelists. They have really done a wonderful job in terms of bringing aspects to the fore which we really were not aware of, or giving us insights, giving us new perspectives into different aspects of global value chains. Of course, I'm extremely grateful to World Trade Center, Ms. Rupa Nayak, Dev Jani for organizing this. But before I close, I must mention one person who has worked tirelessly, very silently behind the scenes is Tripti Chakravarti. So Tripti, I'm really grateful to you as well as the entire World Trade Center team for organizing this. And let's hope that we meet again in towards the end of February for the bigger event.